Honour now to invite Dr. Mike Kelly to come to the chair. I've been given the honour in another occasion to give a thank you speech to Mike Kelly. He is a really great Australian, someone whom I admire very much, and he tells the truth as it is. He doesn't shy away from analysing any issue completely, accurately and honestly. Dr. Mike Kelly.
Thank you very much, Harry, and thank you so much, Mohammed, for the invitation tonight. You are a truly great Australian and a wonderful example of the myth-busting reality that hopefully we'll be talking about tonight. And I'd like to associate myself with Harry's acknowledgement of the traditional custodians of the land, and perhaps noting that my electorate wraps around the ACT and is bigger than 66 countries in the world now. I'll also extend that to the UN peoples of the coastal lands of my electorate, and also to the Wiradjuri peoples of the western reaches of the electorate. And that's an important point for me, actually, which I'll come back to. But this is a critically important subject tonight that I have been immersed in for, 30 years of my life in the security affairs of this nation. And effectively, a lot of this discussion about Islamophobia it intersects and conflates with those security issues in the public mind. And Islamophobia is the right expression, the right term in this space, because as we know, people who follow the Islamic faith come from all different races and backgrounds, and in fact even, and we've had a century and a half of experience in this country of integration of people from different cultural, racial backgrounds of the Islamic faith. An extremely successful story in this nation. A lot of people know about the Afghan Cameliers coming in the 1860s, but even during the White Australia policy, there were Albanian Muslims coming here who were, white. But we have had just a wonderful story of our substantial Turkish, Lebanese populations, Bosnian Muslims. It's just been quite a rainbow of contributions to this country. And where would we have been without that contribution? It is part of that story of what makes this country great. Because Australian isn't an expression that embraces any religion or race. It is about values, and those values have evolved over time, but where we are now is, I think, in the general acceptance of a set of values that includes the policies of inclusion and absorption of respect and celebration of the diversity of this nation. But obviously this question of the security issue has become a particular concern since, in my mind, the conflation between 9/11 and the Tampa business back under the Howard government. You might remember at that time the coalition was struggling in the polls a little bit, and so this ability to reach to these two issues and conflate them served political purpose as well. And of course, we haven't seen a walking away from that approach to business over many years from certain elements within that side of politics. But it often worries me that we haven't given as enough attention to all branches of extremism in this country that we deal with. And in particular, as I sit down as a member of the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security, we get briefings from our agencies about extreme right-wing, effectively Christian background groups causing as much concern for our agencies as any other form of extremism. And I've personally experienced that recently, in fact, when there was a vile anti-Semitic attack on my electorate office in Bega by a group calling themselves the Antipodean Resistance, and that is because my wife and my son are Jewish, and an extremely vile poster was stuck up on the window of my electorate office. But this group advocates the legalisation of the killing of Jews, etc. This is not in any way an organisation that disguises its positions to avoid prosecution. They're quite open about their vile anti-racial positions, and it doesn't just extend to Jews, of course, it extends to anybody who's different from these sort of white Anglo-Saxon Christian backgrounds. So they're as much a concern as anything in this country. But one of the things that's really important for us to do in this narrative, and I was fortunate as the security advisor to Bill Shorten, as these issues started to bubble up to more prominence in the last few years, to make sure that the dialogue we were engaging with in the Australian community in our ability to deal with extremism made sure that we were recognising what our particular strengths were in fighting that extremism. And throughout my life, I've served, in the Defence Force for 20 years, and a lot of that service was actually working with or defending Muslim communities. In Somalia, we were saving Muslim communities from starvation and civil war, and everywhere I went in my deployments, I was often involved in setting up human intelligence connections, so deeply immersing myself in communities and becoming closely engaged with people who I formed close relationships with. And I was really proud to have enabled many Somali refugees to come to this country who worked with us there, who have now become outstanding citizens of this nation, making enormous contributions. But also, my time in Iraq and my work in Afghanistan, this has been a deepening of my understanding of all the dynamics that are at play. And, various faiths in the world have gone through periods where they've confronted debates about what they stand for and who's going to win those battles in terms of moderates versus extremists. Christianity during the Reformation years probably had one of the most traumatic periods and the most bloody in history, and nothing that we've seen in the Islamic world can rival what happened during those years of the Reformation. So our role, our mission, is to support and encourage and promote the moderate voices in all of these faith areas, and to do what we're doing tonight, encourage that faith-based dialogue. But one quote that I made sure all of our people, and Bill Shorten, always mouthed every time we were responding to security issues from the coalition or extreme voices was to quote the actual Director General of Security, David Irvine, who headed up ASIO. And in his farewell speech on the 27th of August 2014, he said these words, which I almost feel like tattooing on myself, but he said, "ASIO recognises that the tiny number of violent extremists does not represent the Islamic communities of Australia. We are talking about a few hundred aberrant souls in a community of nearly 500,000, and it is grossly unfair to blame Muslims who see themselves as a committed component of Australia's multicultural society for the sins of a tiny minority. Our fight is with terrorism, not with Islam or with our Muslim community." And he went on to say, "We should also recognise that the strongest defence against violent extremism lies within the Australian Muslim community itself. Recent uninformed criticism of the leadership of Australia's Muslim community ignores the fact that most Muslim leaders, both civilian and spiritual, have striven hard to address the problem of a few misguided people in their midst. I know from my own experience," he said, "that the problem in Australia would be far greater without their efforts. We should thank them and continue to work with them." So I salute David Irvine for those comments. And I know from my own personal experience that that is so true. The Muslim community of Australia is our first line of defence. I've had my own experience back in the lead up to the 2000 Olympics where we were being scouted by a terrorist extremist group, and it was the information provided to us by the Muslim community of Australia, by our fellow Australians, that enabled us to keep on top of those situations. So they are our first line of defence. So we should recognise, in my opinion, that this problem spreads across many extreme views and groups, and we have this problem in other faiths. What we have with our community, our Muslim community here, and our dialogue that we're engaging is the ability to recognise the commonality of our humanity, the common threads to our faith, and to emphasise those essential elements of those faiths that build peace, that build understanding, that build love amongst our fellow Australians, because the strength of our community is in forging strength through that diversity. It's like, to me, a beautiful patchwork quilt. It takes love and patience to stitch together a beautiful quilt like that, and its strength is in its many panels being stitched closely together, but it takes perseverance and love and patience to make those things come together. So thank you for having me here tonight, and I'm really proud and pleased to have been able to participate. Thank you, Mohammed.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kelly.